He was just 5 years old. One moment, Ellis Marden was playing near a quiet brook on a routine nature outing. The next, he was gone. No sound, no struggle, just disappeared into the trees. What followed was confusion, fear, and questions that still echo years later. The deeper you dig, the more surreal it becomes. This wasn't just a child getting lost. This was something else entirely. This is the story of Ellis Marden. It was the kind of morning that seemed to promise something magical. The sun poured like golden syrup through the lace curtains of the Marden household, glinting off the polished kitchen counter where Marianne Marden packed a small red backpack. She hummed softly, her voice mingling with the morning birdsong outside. Inside the backpack were snacks, a refillable water bottle, a pocket-sized meter buck, and Ellis's favorite plush fox, already worn from too many adventures. Her son, Ellis Marden, barely 5 years old, darted through the house barefoot, his bright yellow hoodie flapping behind him like a cape. He had more energy than the morning sun and more questions than the universe could possibly answer. Marianne glanced at the clock. "Ellis, shoes, now. Your Aunt Margot will be here any second." Ellis bounded into the kitchen, his shoes, somehow already muddy, clutched in one hand. "Do owls sleep during the day because they're bored, or because they're vampires?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. "They're nocturnal, sweetheart. That means they stay up at night and sleep during the day. No vampires involved," Neil said, helping to take himself the shoes on. Moments later, a gray SUV rolled up the gravel driveway. Margot Marden stepped out, tall and wiry, her face weathered from years of fieldwork, her short salt-and-pepper hair tucked beneath a faded cap. A field biologist and part-time lecturer, she lived for field expeditions and rarely invited others. But this time, something had softened in her. She wanted to take Ellis. Maybe it was guilt for missing so many birthdays, or maybe she saw something of her own childhood curiosity mirrored in the boy's wide eyes. "Ready for an adventure, kiddo?" she asked, popping the trunk. Ellis grinned and nodded. "Can we find mushrooms that glow? I saw them on a nature show." "Maybe not in Tanner Ridge, but we'll see what the forest wants to show us." Tanner Ridge in Vermont wasn't on most maps. A highland corridor dense with pine, birch, and cedar, it had recently been opened up to university research under restricted permits. Margot had secured access through her research grant. Though the trail was considered safe, it was isolated, with intermittent radio signal and no cellular coverage past mile 2. But she wasn't worried. She knew these terrains like old friends. As the SUV pulled away, Marianne watched it shrink into the misty horizon. A twinge of unease tickled her gut, a mother's intuition perhaps, but she brushed it aside. Margot was meticulous and cautious, almost to a fault. Ellis would be fine. The plan was simple. Margot and 2 of her students, Iris and Dane, would camp at the field base near Cradle Lake, with Ellis spending just the first day before returning home the next morning with a colleague driving up later that evening. It was a low-risk outing, or so everyone believed. 2 hours into the hike, Margot's group passed the designated fork toward Cradle Lake and, without notifying her assistant on comms, diverted onto a lesser-known path. It wasn't part of the pre-approved trail. "Shortcut," she told Iris and Dane. "Cuts an hour, and the kid's already restless." The air was crisp, thin with altitude alone the camp of after the old bowl structure. They headed to the mushrock covered in Mort's Creek. The loft-burned track well discovered the carpet of decaying leaves. Ellis, delighted, chased dragonflies and mimicked bird calls. The forest felt alive. Margot noted subtle markers, fungi clusters, claw marks on bark, but she didn't pause to explain. Her mind ticked through a checklist of water sources and trail conditions. Behind her, Ellis picked up a feather and stuck it into his cap, like a miniature explorer. Midway up the ridge, radio static filled Margot's walkie. She raised it, frowned. No signal. She had expected that past mile 3, but this early? "They'll move fast, set up base, and get back on the main trail tomorrow," she muttered, more to herself than to the others. She didn't notice Dane glance at Iris, brows raised. Even they knew this wasn't standard protocol. As the group climbed higher, the mist thickened, swallowing sound. Ellis, still animated, ran a few paces ahead, his little boots crunching twigs and gravel. "Look," he called. "A rabbit? No, wait, it's something else." He ran further, his laughter echoing between the trees. Margot shouted, "Ellis, stay close!" The boy stopped at a curve near a moss-covered log, pointing. Margot saw quite up. "What did you see?" she asked. Ellis shrugged. "It went that way, but it looked like a man, with green clothes like yours, but his face was shiny." Margot's skin prickled. "Probably a reflection off a rock. Let's keep going." By the time they reached the temporary campsite clearing, the sun was tilting westward. Cradle Lake shimmered below them. Tents went up, gear unpacked. Ellis drew spirals in the dirt with a stick. Margot checked her notebook. One night, just one night. That evening, around the campfire, Margot gave Ellis a marshmallow and promised he'd be home before lunch the next day. He nodded, yawning. The fox clutched against his chest. Before bed, he asked one more question. "Aunt Margot, does the forest pick who it wants to keep?" She blinked. "What?" "Like maybe the forest keeps some kids to play with forever." She brushed it off as a child's imagination, kissed his forehead, and zipped his sleeping bag, but deep inside, that same mother's instinct flickered, a strange echo of Margot's unease, too quiet to be heard, too soft to be trusted. The morning had slipped into early afternoon by the time Margot's group reached a clearing near a narrow brook that cut through the side of the trail like a silver ribbon, its waters cold, clear, and fast-flowing. Margot, consulting her field notebook and GPS tracker, called a short break. 10 minutes. Hydrate. I'll double-check our coordinates, she said, kneeling beside her pack, flipping through maps, the paper crinkling in her calloused hands. The spot was serene. Sunlight dappled the forest floor through breaks in the canopy, and a soft breeze rustled the tall grass near the water's edge. Ellis had been unusually quiet for the last stretch, perhaps finally tired from all the excitement. Alice offered him a granola bar while Dane crouched to refill their water bottles from the stream with a portable purr fire. "Let him play a bit," Mark said without looking up. "Just keep him in sight." Ellis padded toward the edge of the water, crouching with fascination as small silverfish darted between submerged pebbles. Iris stood a few feet behind him, scrolling on her phone absent-mindedly. No signal, of course, just an old habit. Dane was a little further off, focused on purifying their water. The atmosphere was easy, light. No one was on alert. Then, as quickly as a breath, the moment passed into shadow. Iris looked up when she realized it had grown suddenly quieter. "Ellis?" she called. The boy was gone. Not a splash, not a laugh, not even the sound of twigs snapping under small feet. Just an eerie hush, as if the forest had inhaled and refused to exhale. Dane stood up fast, water bottle forgotten, scanning the tree. "It was right there, just right there," he said, panic flickering in his voice. Iris ran up and down the bank, peering behind boulders, calling his name louder now. "Ellis, Ellis, sweetie, where are you?" Margot, jolted from her notebook by the shouting, spread over. "What happened?" Her voice was sharp, clipped. "He was right there, I swear," Iris stammered. "He walked off, maybe, but it was just seconds." Immediately they fanned out, circling the stream, eyes scanning for movement, clothes, anything. "Ellis," Margot's voice cracked through the woods. "Come out now, sweetheart, this isn't funny." She tried the radio. Dead static. "Of course." "We were just talking to him," Dane said, almost to himself. "He said he saw someone, like someone in green." Margaret froze. "What do you mean, in green?" she asked. "Like forest green, like a ranger." Dane nodded. "He said, that man waved at me, and I thought he meant a hiker, but—" Margot's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "There are no rangers scheduled on this side of the ridge. No patrols?" "I checked," she said, "and we're off the official route. Nobody should be here but us." The sun had dipped lower than expected, shadows stretched longer. Time warped in the trees. Margot pushed back a rising wave of dread. They searched in wider loops, voices raised, repeating Ellis's name, the sound more urgent, less hopeful with each call. Nothing. No footprints, no giggles in hiding, no broken branches, just forest. She forced herself to remain calm. "Maybe he followed a bird or a rabbit. He's 5. Kids wander." "We stick to methodical, sweet patterns," she ordered, but her voice trembled at the edges. After nearly an hour of searching, Margaret regrouped with Iris and Dane near the gear site. "Any sign?" she asked, eyes bloodshot. Both shook their heads. Dane swallowed hard. "What if he did follow someone?" he asked. "That uniform, it looked like a ranger's jacket, with a patch on the arm." Margaret stared at him. With patch on the arm, couldn't see clearly, Tate admitted. Ellis pointed and said, "That man's waiting for me." Then he started walking. "I thought it was just pretend." Margaret's mind raced. She had worked with the Forest Service before. She knew their routines, their uniforms, their people. If there was someone out there impersonating a ranger, that was more than alarming, it was dangerous. "You should have stopped him," she snapped. "I know," Dane muttered, shame coloring his face. They decided to retrace their steps back toward the last known point of contact. Along the trail, Margot stopped suddenly. A broken branch. Low, around child height. She crouched, inspecting the leaves. A single shoe print in soft earth. Small. Too small for any of them. "Here," she said. "He went this way." The trail veered into thicker underbrush. Trees grew closer together, their gnarled roots twisting above the soil like sleeping snakes. It was harder to see more than 10 feet ahead. The silence pressed harder here. As they moved deeper, Iris whispered, "Do you feel that?" "What?" Dane asked. "Like we're not alone." Margot ignored the comment, keeping her focus forward, but even she had to admit something about the air had shifted. After 20 more minutes, they reached a small hollow. At its center, a mound of stones formed a crude ring. Within it lay a child's sock. Yellow. Margaret rushed forward. It was Ellis's. She knelt, picked it up with shaking hands. "Still warm." "He was here," she whispered, "minutes ago." The wind picked up, rustling leaves in a pattern that almost sounded like whispers. Dane looked around. "We need to call someone. The ranger station, helicopter, dogs, anything." Margot didn't argue. She grabbed the emergency beacon from her pack, flipped the cap, and pressed the activation button. A red light blinked, slow and steady. Now they could only wait, but even as they waited, none of them could shake what Dane had said earlier. The man in the green jacket, a ranger's uniform. Margot kept replaying it over and over. No rangers were scheduled. No hikers had permits in this sector. Then who had Ellis seen? And why had he followed him? The moment the rescue helicopters began circling above Tanner Ridge, the story of Ellis's disappearance spiraled from isolated wilderness panic to regional media frenzy. Within hours of pressing the emergency beacon, Margot and her 2 students were extracted by park rangers and interviewed on-site by a mobile unit dispatched from the Vermont Bureau of Missing Persons. The search teams, bloodhounds, drones, thermal sensors covered every direction from the point of Ellis's last known sighting, but despite 48 straight hours of sweeping the area, no sign of the boy emerged beyond the sock and the faint footprint. It didn't take long before suspicions began to turn inward. At the command post set up near the forest's edge, a makeshift press center had emerged. News vans, photographers, and even podcasters circled like vultures, each angling for an angle that hadn't yet been told. For the investigators, the question was blunt. How does a child vanish under adult supervision in a controlled setting, with no trace? And more pointedly, how does that happen while in the care of his own aunt? Margot's initial debrief had been calm, cooperative, even clinical. She explained the trail diversion, the 10-minute window by the stream, Ellis's mention of seeing a man in green. But as the hours wore on and questions deepened, inconsistencies began to surface. Why hadn't she waited nearly an hour to activate the emergency beacon? And why had none of the students witnessed a clear face of the supposed man Ellis followed? By the second day, Margot was no longer treated as a cooperating witness. She was quietly classified as a person of interest. Marianne, devastated and stunned, was flown in under police escort to the base of Tanner Ridge, where she was briefed and asked to confirm Ellis's clothing, personality traits, and any unusual behavior prior to the trip. Her composure cracked when she heard Margot had deviated from the trail. "She promised," Marianne whispered to the detective. "She swore she would keep him safe." Margot was detained for 2 nights under suspicion of negligence and possible foul play. Her belongings were seized, her phone and laptop were combed for deleted messages, travel logs, hidden photos, but nothing material surfaced. No one could prove she had done anything other than panic in the face of a tragic disappearances. By the 3rd day she was released, but the damage had been done. Her name was now tied to every search engine result about Ellis's case. Her credibility, once pristine in the academic world, began to unravel. Back at her apartment in Montpelier, Margot spiraled quickly. She couldn't sleep. When she did, her dreams were thick with fog and shadows. She saw Ellis standing on a forest path, pointing, always pointing, toward something just out of frame. Sometimes in her dreams he looked older, like time was passing somewhere else. Other nights the dreams twisted into something darker, Ellis screaming silently behind glass, or standing hand in hand with a man whose face shifted like smoke. Her therapist, a trauma specialist, prescribed sedatives and weekly sessions. "Your mind is trying to fill in blanks your memory can't provide," he told her gently. But guilt is a powerful storyteller. Then, exactly 1 week after the incident, a small, unmarked envelope arrived at the police station in Bari. Inside was a USB drive. No return address, no fingerprints. Forensic analysts scanned it immediately, bracing for a hoax, or worse, malicious software. What they found instead was a single file, a video time-stamped 2 days after Ellis's disappearance. It opened on static, then focused slowly. A still frame, grainy but unmistakable. Ellis Marden, in his yellow hoodie, standing in a forest clearing that investigators believed was roughly 5 miles east of where he had last been seen. He was smiling. Not fearfully, not nervously, just the easy, trusting smile of a child. His small hand was held by someone off-screen. The image panned slightly. A man stood beside him, clad in forest green. Standard Ranger uniform, utility belt, radio patches partially visible. But his face was blurred. Not digitally, physically obscured, as though he'd turned just as the frame was captured. Investigators froze the video, enhanced, zoomed, layered filters. No luck. The man's identity remained masked, but the uniform, that was authentic. Not a costume, not a fake. It bore the insignia of the U.S. Forest Service, with a specific regional badge used exclusively by employees in the Adirondack sector. The problem? That area was 2 states away, and no ranger assigned there matched the general build or gear seen in the image. The news broke in under an hour. Local channels led with "Breakthrough in Ellis Case," while online theorists tore the video apart frame by frame, comparing shadows, trying to triangulate light angles and tree species to identify the location. Some suggested Ellis had been taken to a different forest. Others hinted at deep state involvement or secret wilderness experiments. The comments flooded faster than officials could respond. Mary Ann watched the video in a small conference room at the precinct. She said nothing for a full minute after it played. Then, quietly, "He looks fine." But her hand shook. "He's not scared. He's holding someone's hand like he trusts them, like he knows them." That statement sent a ripple through the room. Was Ellis coerced, drugged, or worse? Had he been in contact with someone they hadn't known existed, someone who had earned his trust before the trip? Margaret was brought back in to view the footage, her face drained of color. "That isn't Ellis pretending. That's him being him," she murmured. "He's comfortable, relaxed, like he's with a camp counselor." She paused. "Or a relative?" The implications were staggering. Was the man a stranger or someone from Ellis's past? Someone who had studied the group, anticipated the trip, known exactly when and where to intercept? Theories multiplied. A former ranger with a grudge? A cult member? A long-lost family member estranged from Mary Ann's side? Back at the site of the sock, the search teams redoubled efforts. Every hollow log, every creek was combed again. But the trail had grown colder, the earth harder, the leads thinner. For the first time, the possibility that Ellis had been moved, transported, even out of state, became a central part of the investigation. Margot, meanwhile, sat on her couch with the lights off. The video paused on her laptop screen. She stared at that tiny hand in that larger one, over and over, replaying a single question in her mind. Why did Ellis smile? 5 years after the disappearance of Ellis Marden, Tanner Ridge had turned into more than a location. It had become a ghost. The national spotlight had long since dimmed, replaced by newer tragedies and viral distractions. But for a handful of locals and fringe investigators, the mystery still pulsed like an open wound. Each spring, a few obsessed hikers and amateur sleuths returned to the ridge, some hoping to find a clue, others simply needing to believe the boy's story wasn't finished. Among them that year was a university caving team from the University of New Hampshire, part of a graduate geology program exploring undocumented karst systems rumored to run beneath the northeastern slopes of Tanner Ridge. Led by Dr. Miles Gerber, an eccentric geologist known for publishing fringe theories about subterranean river flows, the team had set out to confirm a sinkhole that appeared during a recent landslide. What they found instead was a narrow rock fissure, barely a meter wide, that led into a collapsed cavern system. Crawling one by one through the dusty passage, the team descended into a pitch-black chamber that hadn't seen sunlight in millennia. Their headlamps swept across stalactites and uneven stone floors. It wasn't until the youngest member, a first-year grad student named Lena Harrow, noticed something metallic reflecting from under a layer of silty dust near a rock pile that the mood shifted. She brushed away the dirt and unearthed a battered digital camera, an old model, Sony-banded, coated in grime and corrosion. Back at their base camp, after hours of charging and carefully cleaning the device, the team managed to retrieve partial data from its corrupted SD card. Most files were damaged beyond recognition, but one folder remained intact. In it, 5 photos. The first 4 were standard wilderness shots: trees, fungus, animal tracks, nothing unusual. The 5th image, however, stopped everyone cold. In the center of the frame stood a young boy around 6 years old, his yellow hoodie unmistakably familiar. He was standing beside a man in a Green Ranger uniform, the same blurred face from the USB video years ago, only this time partially visible, just enough to show pale skin and a chin scar. They stood together at the mouth of a different cave, one that none of the team recognized. The date on the photo read October 8, 2006, nearly 2 years after Ellis disappeared. Dr. Gerber contacted authorities immediately. Within days, FBI forensics had joined the site. The cavern where the camera was found was mapped, documented, and flagged as part of a restricted federal area. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Who took the photo? How did it end up buried in a cave miles from any known path? And if Ellis was still alive in 2006, where had he gone afterward? While investigators combed through the evidence, Lena, still shaken, confided in Dr. Gerber that she had found something else on the hike back from the lower cavern. She had been documenting rock formations when she came upon a small secondary chamber, partially collapsed but still accessible. There, behind a curtain of moss and calcified vines, she had discovered a bundle of clothing, child garments, precisely folded and stacked, a yellow hoodie, denim jeans, one blue sock, a pair of Disney-themed sneakers, size 11. Lena hadn't touched them, but she had photographed the arrangement before returning. The photos were reviewed that evening, and they sent a shiver through the investigation team. The clothing was too pristine. There were no signs of decay, blood, or animal interference. No claw marks, no tearing, no evidence of trauma. The hoodie was even still zipped, as if someone had taken it off gently. The sneakers' soles were free of mud, as though they had never stepped outside that cavern. For forensic experts, the scene was unsettlingly surgical. Not only was there no trace of a struggle, there was no trace of a story at all. It looked staged, like a set piece in a play whose script had been burned. The site was cordoned off, and forensic biologists began collecting every fiber, every trace of DNA. Preliminary tests confirmed what many feared and hoped. These were indeed Ellis Marden's clothes, unchanged from the day he disappeared. When Marianne was called in to review the photos, she gasped, not because of the items themselves, but because of what was missing. "His fox," she whispered. "He never went anywhere without it. Where's his plush fox?" Investigators made note. No toy, no personal artifacts, just the clothes. One theory emerged quietly among the team, that Ellis had been kept somewhere clean, possibly underground, and the clothes were preserved to fabricate a rediscovery. But that begged the question, by whom? And why now? Surveillance of the region was stepped up. New questions were asked about abandoned military bunkers, private land holdings, and former employees of the U.S. Forest Service. Nothing pointed clearly in any direction. Meanwhile, Lena, haunted by what she'd seen, began poring over old local folklore and ranger logs. She found several mentions of a watchman from decades ago, a ghost story told among locals about a ranger who guided lost children to safety but was never seen by adults. Some said he was a forest spirit. Others believed he was a real man who had gone rogue in the 1970s and lived off-grid ever since, helping or harming based on his whims. Lena was skeptical, but after seeing the photo, After seeing Ellis look calm and alive 2 years after vanishing, she no longer dismissed the impossible. The camera was sent to Quantico. Image enhancement software revealed partial serial numbers on the man's badge and a reflection in the boy's eye, a distorted figure behind the photographer. There had been at least 3 people present when the photo was taken: Ellis, the ranger, and someone holding the camera. That someone had yet to come forward. In the weeks that followed, news leaked to the public. Theories exploded, forums lit up. Some believed Ellis had been part of a government experiment. Others said the forest itself had claimed and then returned him. A few claimed the man in the photo resembled a missing park ranger from Arizona who disappeared in 1994, and then, in the same cave where the clothes had been found, a faint scratch mark was discovered on the rock wall. 4 straight lines, 1 diagonal slash through them, like someone counting days. Following the forensic breakthrough from the camera and clothing found in the cavern, search teams returned to Tanner Ridge with renewed urgency, expanding their grid by nearly 2 miles in each direction from the site where Ellis's belongings had been discovered. Among them was Agent Melissa Price, a veteran FBI profiler specializing in long-term child abductions, who had flown in from Quantico to personally oversee the scene. She believed the cave site was more than a discard point. It was curated, chosen with intent, and she was convinced it wasn't the first time someone had done this. 3 days into the renewed sweep, a second bundle was uncovered by a canine unit trained in scent detection. It had been buried shallowly beneath a layer of moss and forest debris, roughly 70 meters downslope from the original cave entrance. At first glance, it looked like trash: a worn pink jacket, faded and muddied, with cartoon unicorn patches stitched near the sleeves. But it was far too small for Ellis, and clearly of different make. The jacket's zipper was halfway down, and inside one of the pockets was a laminated sticker with a name scrawled in permanent marker: HB. The item was photographed, bagged, and immediately sent for testing. Agent Price had a sinking feeling as she watched it being loaded into the evidence van. She'd seen this before, the juxtaposition of 2 cases in one place, years apart, but connected through geography and something far more sinister. Results came in within 48 hours. The DNA matched missing persons records. The jacket belonged to Holly Belling, a 6-year-old girl who had vanished during a family camping trip in the Allegheny National Forest 2 years prior. That site was nearly 600 miles away from Tanner Ridge. Her case had gone cold within 6 weeks, the official theory blaming a river current, but her body had never been found. Now, her jacket was here, barely decomposed, preserved unnaturally. The media caught wind of the discovery before law enforcement could control the narrative. "Second child's clues found in Ellis case site," the headlines screamed. Social media ignited conspiracy channels, claiming the forest was a dumping ground for a serial abductor, a secret cult, even supernatural entities. Meanwhile, Agent Price leaned toward something more grounded and far more chilling: a mobile offender, someone who collected children, transported them, and eventually staged their traces with a kind of methodical precision that made her skin crawl. The presence of 2 children's items, years apart but within the same secluded region, suggested either coincidence, which she did not believe in, or long-term planning by someone deeply familiar with remote terrain and law enforcement blind spots. Meanwhile, Marianne was informed of the new discovery under tight emotional supervision. She recognized the name Belling, remembering vaguely seeing the girl's photo in an old missing poster circulated on parenting forums years ago. But what disturbed her most was the idea that Ellis might not have been alone, that others had suffered too, and that maybe someone was keeping score. Her grief turned to something sharper, a cold resolve that this wasn't going to fade into silence. Investigators turned back to one of the few constants still living: Margot. Her original account was being reevaluated in light of new evidence, and inconsistencies that had once been brushed aside as trauma responses now took on new weight. She was contacted for a follow-up interview and asked to appear at the bar precinct. She agreed, hesitantly. Over the phone, her voice was calm but distant, like someone halfway detached from the world. She told Agent Price she had been dreaming again, this time about caves and clocks ticking loudly in the dark. She said she remembered something new, a sound during that hike she had never mentioned before, a mechanical whirring, like a generator, off trail. The next morning, Margot never arrived for her scheduled interview. Instead, at 7:32 a.m., Vermont State Police responded to a single-vehicle accident on Route 14, a winding rural road just north of her residence. Witnesses reported hearing the crash but seeing no other vehicles involved. Her car had veered off the road at a sharp bend, crashing headlong into a pine tree. Margot died on impact. Her seatbelt was fastened, airbag deployed, but her body bore signs of trauma inconsistent with standard frontal collision. Her skull had been fractured on the left side, angled in a way that suggested a lateral impact, possibly before the crash occurred. Toxicology was ordered, no substances found, no alcohol, no sedatives. The coroner flagged the case as suspicious circumstances. Investigators found her cell phone shattered near the passenger floorboard, its last outgoing call placed at 6:47 a.m. to a number registered to a now-defunct landline tracing back to a ranger outpost in New York, closed since 1998. Her laptop, found in the trunk, had been wiped clean 2 days prior. At the funeral, Mary Ann stood alone in the back, dressed in black but with a stare like steel. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She only watched as the casket lowered, as if searching it for something that wouldn't be buried. Margot had kept secrets. Of that Mary Ann was now sure. Whether to protect herself, Ellis, or someone else entirely, she didn't know. But the timing of her death, the odd details, the erased data, it wasn't coincidence. Agent Price and her team dug deeper into Margot's past fieldwork. They uncovered records of expeditions in other states, always near federal or protected land, sometimes with overlapping timelines to other missing child reports. They found receipts for camping gear purchased in duplicate, multiple backpacks, multiple notebooks. Price didn't share everything with Margot's home, which revealed something even stranger. Inside a locked metal case beneath the floorboards was a collection of items labeled by date and name. Only one item was listed for 2001, E. Inside the envelope was a child's drawing, crude but clear, of a man in a green jacket holding hands with a smaller figure under tall trees. The man's head was scribbled out violently in black. 2 weeks after Margot's death, while forensic teams still sifted through her personal effects and digital remnants, a strange new development emerged. Not from the police, not from any government agency, but from a group of internet users buried deep in niche web forums dedicated to unsolved cases. A user, going by the name Hollow Oaks Watcher, had been posting cryptic entries on a minimalist blog hosted on an encrypted free platform, and each entry bore a date, a child's first name, and a location vague enough to be overlooked, but specific enough for someone who knew where to look. The first post, time-stamped October 2, 2001, the exact day Ellis disappeared, read simply, "He was curious. The forest saw him first." One of the chosen. The blog had remained largely unnoticed, buried in the static of conspiracy sites and dark web back alleys, until a Redditor cross-references its archive with the known timeline of Ellis's disappearance and several other child missing person cases in forested areas across the northeastern United States. The matches were chilling. Each blog post followed a pattern: sparse, poetic language, oblique references to woods, light, silence, and something referred to only as the Warden. In total, there were 13 posts over 20 years. Most had gone live within 48 hours of a child's disappearance before any mainstream news could have reported them. It was impossible to determine who ran the blog. It had no contact page, no metadata, no links, and no trackable login history. Attempts to trace the origin failed, yet someone out there was writing about these children as though they had been selected, not stolen. When this surfaced, Agent Price immediately contacted Mary Ann, who was already beginning her own quiet investigation, no longer satisfied with waiting on the system. Mary Ann had been reading every document, watching every interview, even listening to old voicemails from Margot, hoping to hear a missed clue. She had begun visiting bookstores, libraries, archives, collecting anything tied to regional folklore, old ranger reports, and indigenous stories about the woods. The phrase, "the Warden," kept surfacing, usually in oral traditions about a forest guardian who protected the land from intruders and sometimes claimed wandering children, not out of malice, but because they were called. The blog's language seemed to echo that folklore. She read every entry, again and again, trying to decipher if this was the work of a deranged mind or someone with real knowledge of what happened. Around the same time, Marianne received a sealed box from the estate executor handling Margot's assets. It contained a few personal books from Margot's private collection, field guides, research journals, and a copy of a rare regional manuscript titled Whispers of the Ridge. It was brittle, annotated in Margot's handwriting, and laced with pressed leaves used as bookmarks. Marianne flipped through absent-mindedly until something fell from one of the pages. A folded note, tucked between chapters discussing forest sentience theories. The paper was old, creased multiple times, and written in Margaret's neat, looping script. It read, "Ellis says he talks to the man in the woods every night. I thought it was imagination, but he describes things he couldn't possibly know. Plants that haven't bloomed yet, places we've never walked. I'm starting to believe he hears something real." Marianne stared at the note, her hands trembling. The context was unknown, the date missing, but it had clearly been written before the trip. Had Margot known something more? Had she been preparing Ellis or simply ignoring early warning signs? The idea that her son might have been communicating with something or someone before the day he vanished cracked something inside her. Not fear, not even grief. It was an emotion deeper than rage or sorrow. It was the beginning of clarity. She brought the note to Agent Price. They had it tested for age, fingerprints, ink type. It came back inconclusive, but the paper was consistent with a notebook Margot had used during field expeditions in late 2000. That would mean she had recorded Ellis's strange conversations months before the trip. Price requested access to Margot's private journals. Among dozens of pages about bird migration and mineral content, they found half-finished paragraphs referencing boundary markets, seasonal pull, and a phrase that sent chills down both women's spines. "Spring sings the loudest," he told Ellis that too. Back on the encrypted post appeared, it had been dormant for 8 months. Now it read, "The mother stirs. She's closer to the song. He watches her now." There was no date, no timestamp, only those words. Price ordered immediate monitoring of the blog's hosting domain. Nothing came back. It was routed through multiple proxy servers and bounced across international IP chains. Someone was going to great lengths to remain hidden. Marianne returned to Margot's house, which now felt like walking into a fossil of someone else's obsession. She wandered through the rooms, noticing small things she hadn't before. A forest map above the fireplace with dots marked in red ink. A framed sketch of a tree with eyes drawn subtly in the bark. A closet full of hiking gear labeled with tags, some for Ellis, others with initials she didn't recognize. And then, behind the bookcase in Margot's study, a hidden compartment, poorly patched. Inside was a dusty tape recorder, the kind used by field researchers in the 90s. There were 3 tapes. Marianne took them, left without speaking, and drove home with her hands clenching the wheel tighter than she realized. That night she played the first tape. It crackled to life with wind sounds and Margot's voice, tired but focused. "Day 14, she said. "Ellis says the forest taught him a song. I asked him to hum it. It was the same as the tonal pattern I heard last night from the eastern ridge. 4 notes, over and over. How does he know this was here tape?" Same tape was more disturbing, his voice melodic but hauntingly offbeat. Margot didn't speak, only breathing. The 3rd tape began with nothing but static, then a whisper. Not Ellis. Not Margot. Something deeper. A man's voice, barely audible. She is listening now. In the aftermath of the tape recordings and the blog's chilling update, the investigation team pushed further into technological analysis, hoping to find tangible proof in a sea of unsettling implications. Agent Price redirected focus back to the precise location where the camera and Ellis's clothing had been found. Over the years, various wild researchers had installed trail cams and motion-strengthened devices along paths in and around Tanner Ridge for environmental surveys. Most of these had gone untouched in archived drives or forgotten local hard disks, but now every single one became a potential gold mine. A specialist named Arjun Patel from the Digital Forensics Lab at MIF was brought in to comb through terabytes of motion-synthesized footage from the previous 6 months, near the site. On the 3rd day of his analysis, he called Price at 2:17 a.m., his voice sharp with something that could only be described as fear. "I found something," he said. "You need to see this in person." The footage was dated precisely 4 days before the cave discovery. The camera was mounted along a tree line just northwest of the sinkhole where the camera had been unearthed. At first the frame showed nothing but dusk light filtering through branches, small woodland creatures scurrying past. Then, at 1842, a figure emerged. Not walking from the trail themselves, the person wore a dark green jacket, not an official ranger's uniform, but styled similarly, enough to evoke the image. The hood was pulled tight, obscuring most facial features, but the gait and body language seemed deliberate, methodical. In one hand, they held a drawstring cloth sack. The person crouched and began methodically placing items on the forest floor. Small, colorful objects that became clearer with zoom enhancement. Toys. A miniature plastic train, a yellow dinosaur, a plush rabbit, and a spinning top. All old, worn, some with fabric faded, stuffing escaping, the kind of toys a child might have loved 5 or 10 years ago. The figure did not look around. They did not hesitate. When finished, they stood, turned their back to the camera, and walked away, again, not toward any trail but deeper into the wilderness, vanishing between the trees as silently as they had arrived. Prout watched the video on repeat. The timestamp made her skin crawl. 4 days before the cave was uncovered. It wasn't just that someone had been there, it was that they wanted to be seen. Or worse, they didn't care. The placement of the toys suggested ritual, remembrance, or perhaps a breadcrumb trail only the intended recipient would understand. Forensics swept the area immediately. All the toys were still there, precisely where placed. No fingerprints, no traceable purchase history, nothing that led to any known suspect or missing child profile. But beneath one of the toys, the rabbit, they found a tag, long faded, with the letters scrawled in childlike handwriting. Marianne's breath hitched when she saw the initials. Ellis's middle name was Arthur. It had to mean something. Email back at Quantico, a separate line of inquiry had been progressing quietly. One of the digital archivists working through the early case files had requested high-resolution copies of all photographs taken during the original 2001 search party debriefs. Most were mundane, group shots of hikers, posed interviews, press events. But one photo stood out, a group shot taken the morning the team departed for the hike. It showed Margot, Iris, Dane, and Ellis, all smiling beside the SUV, yet something about the spacing seemed wrong. A forensic imaging specialist enhanced the background, adjusting contrast and light levels to reveal what the naked eye had missed. There was a distinct shadow between Margot and Iris, a vertical space oddly devoid of shape, like someone had once stood there and had been digitally removed. The spacing of their shoulders, the way Iris's arm curled slightly inward, suggested she had been leaning into someone. But that someone was gone. Using advanced software, the team identified pixel discrepancies, confirming that the image had been tampered with, post-capture. The file's metadata showed a last edit timestamp 3 days after Ellis vanished, long after the photo had supposedly been filed. When questioned, neither Iris nor Dane recalled another person being present that morning, but both admitted that stress and trauma may have erased some clarity. Price, however, didn't believe it was forgetfulness. She believed it was omission, either deliberate or psychologically implanted. Someone had been removed, someone who wasn't supposed to be seen, and someone with access to edit official investigation material. This revelation triggered a full audit of the early investigation files. Dozens of reports had minor inconsistencies, names listed once and never again, witnesses untraceable, descriptions that changed between retellings. A pattern emerged. Subtle deletions, removals of reference, data corruption that couldn't be explained by system errors alone. It was as though someone, somewhere, had been pruning the case from the inside, ensuring that specific people, phrases, and photographs quietly disappeared from official memory. Marianne, upon learning of the photograph alteration, requested to see all the original prints Margot had kept. Many were still boxed, unopened, in storage. In one envelope, she found a print of the same group photo, unretouched, and there, unmistakably, stood another figure. A man in his late 20s, clean-shaven, broad-shouldered, wearing a ranger-style jacket. His face was partially turned, but enough showed to match the chin scar visible in the recovered camera image. Beneath the photo, in Market's writing, was a single name, C. She brought it immediately to Pry. "Who's C.R.?" Marianne asked, her voice steady despite the storm behind her eyes. Price didn't have an answer. The initials didn't match any known rangers, relatives, or registered volunteers from the trip. A deep dive into national databases turned up nothing. The man was a ghost. As the pieces started connecting, the case no longer resembled a child disappearances. It looked like a framework, built and rebuilt over decades, held together by silence, false memories, and surgical erasure. Someone had been playing a very long game, and Ellis wasn't the only piece on the board. Following the revelation of the doctored group photo and the mysterious initials CR scribbled by Margot, Agent Price expanded the scope of the investigation to include dormant surveillance and monitoring assets in the greater Tanner Ridge region. Her team accessed weather stations, geological research sensors, and any atmospheric monitoring equipment that may have recorded anomalous activity in the last 2 decades. While combing through archived logs from the Summit Point Atmospheric Station, a now defunded scientific outpost established in the late 80s, Price found a pattern that had gone unnoticed for years. On October 2nd of every year, precisely at 6:37 p.m., a narrowband radio signal of unknown origin was recorded for exactly 11 minutes. The signal consisted of a repeating 4-note tonal sequence followed by 3637 p. The frequency was just low enough to sit outside typical radio usage and had never been officially investigated due to its short duration and presumed atmospheric interference. The log entries showed that the anomaly had first been noted in 2001, the day Ellis disappeared. And it had repeated every single year since, never failing. Always from the same vector, originating somewhere near the peak of Tanner Ridge. Price consulted a physicist specializing in non-terrestrial signals who confirmed the pattern wasn't naturally occurring. "It's structured," he said, "intentional, possibly a beacon or a coded transmission, but it's definitely artificial." The discovery reignited media interest, and speculation ran wild. Theories ranged from secret government operations to communication with subterranean technology to supernatural forest entities. Price, though skeptical, couldn't ignore the consistency or the timing. She coordinated a new surveillance setup atop Tanner Ridge to monitor for the signal during its next expected broadcast. Satellite dishes, spectrum analyzers, and thermal imaging drones were deployed. While the tech teams prepared, Marianne followed a separate lead. She'd received a call from a retired forest ranger named Glenn Robeson, who'd served in the region for over 30 years before retiring in 2004. He'd been watching the Ellis case quietly, but something in the recent reports stirred old memories. He'd told Marianne that back in the late 90s, he'd been stationed at a now-defunct ranger lookout called Weirm Point. "It's a strange patch of trees," he said. "Things go quiet up there. Radios fuzz out, birds vanish. Even the air feels different." He claimed that during his final years, a handful of children who came up with school groups or family campers would speak, in passing, about the man in green or the tall watcher who whispers when no one's looking. Initially, he thought it was just imagination, kids creating forest myths. But the descriptions were consistent: a man dressed like a ranger, never seen clearly, always near the tree line, never speaking to adults. "They said he knew their names without asking," Glenn recalled. "One girl told me he promised her a place where time didn't move, said he'd wait for her when she was ready." Glenn filed a few of these reports unofficially, scribbled into a leather-bound notebook, never submitted to superiors. When the Ellis case hit the news in 2001, he dug out the notebook, but the fear of ridicule kept him silent. Until now. Price obtained the notebook and cross-referenced the dates and locations of the children's sightings with the dates of the anomalous radio signals. 3 of them aligned within a 48-hour window. It wasn't proof, but it was another piece. More importantly, one child had made a crude drawing, long arms, green jacket, no face, beside a tall tree marked with the symbol inside a circle. That same symbol had been carved onto a stone found inside the cave near Ellis's folded clothing, a detail never made public. Someone or something had been present in these woods long before Ellis, and perhaps long after. October 2nd approached again. For the first time, Price and her team were ready to capture the signal live. At 6:37 p.m., the equipment activated, and there it was, cleaner than ever, a 4-note sequence, haunting, mechanical, yet oddly melodic. Analysts recorded the audio, ran it through spectrograms, even converted the tones into MIDI to examine its structure. It matched the song Ellis had been humming in Margot's tapes almost. He'd been taught that song before he vanished. Or perhaps, as Marianne increasingly believed, he'd heard it through the trees from the same place that broadcast it now. Simultaneously, an analyst monitoring heat signatures detected a flare-up, a temporary spike in ground temperature just outside the cave entrance. It lasted 6 minutes, then dropped. A drone was dispatched, and though it found no heat source by the time it arrived, it captured something else, a fresh disturbance in the soil, shaped roughly like a child's footprint, small and angled as if pivoting mid-step. No tracks led to or away from it. Marianne listened to the signal herself. Despite its simplicity, it made her chest tighten. It was as though something ancient was calling out, not loudly, but persistently, rhythmically, refusing to be forgotten. She pressed her palms to her ears, trying to block it, but it echoed inside her like a lullaby from a place she'd never been. A week later, in her late sister's study, she opened a loud drawer she'd never been. Inside was a folder labeled Continuity. In it were sketches, charts, symbols, timestamps. At the bottom, a printed map with a red circle drawn around a specific cluster of pines near the northern slope of Tanner Ridge. Next to the circle, Margot had written, "They always return to this point." The folder labeled Continuity had been a turning point, but Marianne knew there were still deeper layers in Margot's life, parts that even the exhaustive investigations had missed. After weeks of cross-referencing her sister's maps, timestamps, and cryptic annotations, she returned to Margot's cabin one final time, determined to search it with her own hands. It was there, inside a rusted metal box beneath loose floorboards in the study, hidden beneath a false panel marked with wax pencil, that she found the water-damaged Ziploc bag containing 2 heavily corroded SD cards and a handwritten label that simply read, E. Spring Trial. Her heart pounded as she held the brittle plastic, its corners worn thin. The bag smelled faintly of moss and mildew, as if it had spent years underground. Back home, she contacted a private data recovery expert who specialized in damaged digital media. He warned her not to expect much. Oxidation, he said, usually erases everything, but she insisted. He ran the recovery process over several painstaking days, and when he called her back, his voice trembled. "There's one video," he said, "and you need to see it alone." The file had no title. Its metadata was corrupted, but it loaded slowly, frame by frame, until the screen filled with a shaky shot of trees rushing past. The camera, probably a cheap child's camcorder or an old phone, was moving wildly. Heavy breathing filled the audio, small and uneven. Then came the sound of feet pounding underfoot, and the camera jerked upward to reveal a boy's terrified face. He was older than the last known photo, maybe 6, maybe closer to 7. His cheeks were flushed, smeared with dirt, eyes wide and glancing back over his shoulder as he ran. The image flickered as he whispered hoarsely, "He's coming. I saw him again. I don't want to play anymore." The lens blurred as he tripped and scrambled up, queasing. Then, somewhere close behind, a man's voice, soft, coaxing, but unmistakably firm, murmured, "Ellis. It's okay. You said you liked the trees. Don't be scared. Come back and we'll try again, this time in spring. Spring's when the forest sings. Remember?" Marianne froze the frame. She could hear her own breathing now, loud in the silence of her living room. The voice continued, "No more hiding. It's almost time. Let's get it right this time, Ellis." The boy whimpered, "I don't want to go back. Please." The video ended abruptly and static, cutting mid-step, the screen freezing on a blurred image of branches overhead, angled strangely, almost like looking up from a pit. She sent the clip to Price, who had the voice analyzed against every known suspect, every ranger and volunteer, every law enforcement member involved with the case. No match. Not even close. The audio engineer noted a strange undertone in the man's voice, something layered beneath, almost like a second frequency, inaudible to human ears, but detected in the waveform. When slowed and isolated, the undertone resembled a low hum, 4 notes again. The same four-note sequence from the radio signal. Ellis hadn't just run away. He'd been held somewhere, and whoever had held him had access to sophisticated means of manipulating time, perception, or memory, possibly all three. Price revisited every audio file from the investigation. In one of the original search logs, buried in background noise, the same phrase could be heard faintly during a night vision sweep. "Spring sings loudest." No one had noticed it before. Someone had been close, whispering from the dark, only partially caught on tape. The term "spring trial" on the SD bag gnawed at Marianne. Had there been more than one child involved? More than one test? Was Ellis part of some experiment in behavioral manipulation? Ritual, or worse, a cycle repeated until perfected? She returned to Margot's notebook and found 3 dates circled in red, spaced exactly 1 year apart, always in April. Beside each, a single word: observed. Price and her team cross-checked those dates with missing persons records. 3 disappearances, different states, similar circumstances. Each case unsolved. Each child last seen near a forest. The video was leaked online anonymously. Marianne never claimed ownership, but the internet erupted. Conspiracy theorists broke down every second. Some swore they heard other voices in the static. Others claimed to see a second figure briefly in the trees. Someone even enhanced the final frame to show what appeared to be a hand reaching toward the sky. A hand not belonging to Ellis. Forums speculated wildly. Cloning experiments, alternate dimensions, consciousness transfer. But for Marianne, none of that mattered. What mattered was her son was scared, running, and still speaking like he believed he'd be forced to try again. Price launched an internal review of every case tied to children going missing in national forests since 1985. The patterns were uncanny. A high number clustered near sites with decommissioned ranger stations, most of them with no working radio towers. Several of those towers, it turned out, had malfunctioned at precisely 6:37 p.m. on various April dates across 2 decades. Then came another message on the Hollow Oaks Watcher blog. It appeared without warning, bolded text against a black screen. The boy remembers. The cycle cracks. Spring isn't enough anymore. We're adjusting. The voice from the recovered video haunted every room it was played in, not only for its chilling tone, but for the calm confidence it carried, like a teacher speaking to a student about a lesson yet to be repeated. Price fed the clip into a multi-sense voice print analysis system used by intelligence agencies, comparing the whisper with every known vocal profile tied to federal, medical, and academic records within a 20-year window. After 7 days of processing, the system pinged a high-probability match. Dr. Carrie Karsten Rivenhall, a British-born American psychiatrist who specialized in experimental behavioral therapy for emotionally dysregulated children. Rivenhall had worked in the United States under various federal grants, bouncing between institutions before joining a controversial pilot program in Vermont focused on environmental therapy, a method of placing children in controlled wilderness settings under psychological supervision. The program was quietly dissolved after an internal ethics complaint. No charges were filed. 3 years later, Rivenhall disappeared from his last registered clinic. His body was never recovered. His car was found burned near the Canadian border. At the time, it was ruled a suicide. That was 7 years ago. With the name came a file, heavily redacted, detailing his methods. Rivenhall believed that true emotional regulation in children could be reset by severing all prior associations and rebuilding identity in nature-based environments. His writings were filled with analogies: forests as wombs, the mind as soil, memory as moldable clay. Marianne read every word and knew, in her gut, this man had taken her son not to hurt him, but to remake him. Price secured a warrant to explore all properties ever affiliated with the abandoned environmental therapy program. One stood out, a decommissioned medical research station listed as dormant since 1992, buried within a restricted zone overlapping the far edge of Tanner Ridge. Originally constructed as a Cold War-era biology lab, it had never been properly decommissioned and appeared, on paper, as a derelict storage site. A tactical unit was dispatched with Price and Marianne riding behind in a secure vehicle. The entrance to the facility had been collapsed decades prior in a controlled demolition, but ground-penetrating radiator revealed a secondary shaft, narrow, vertical, and still intact. They descended via mechanical lift, the air cold and metallical. At 76 feet below ground, the shaft opened into a subterranean hallway, lights flickering dimly, with emergency bow systems apparently still functioning. Doors lined the corridor, unlabeled, sealed. At the far end, a single panel blinked green, a biometric scanner. A technician bypassed it with a manual override, and the door slid open. Inside, the room was silent. A row of old therapy chairs faced a one-way mirror. On a cot in the corner sat a boy, pale, thin, maybe 13. His head turned slowly as they entered. His eyes were tired but bright. He didn't flinch, didn't smile. He studied Price, then Marianne. Finally, in a soft, flat voice, he asked, "Is it spring yet?" Marianne stepped forward, tears rising behind her eyes. "Ellis?" she whispered. The boy blinked. "That's what he called me," he said, "but sometimes he used other names." She rushed to him, hands trembling, but froze inches away. "Do you know who I am?" He tilted his head. "You look like the dream," he said. "He said I'd forget you. That forgetting made it easier." Medical teams confirmed the boy's identity through DNA. It was Ellis. He had survived. Somehow, impossibly, he had lived for almost a decade inside a sealed facility that had no recorded visitors, no working entrances, no power supply registered with the state. The interior ran on solar battery backflow systems, ancient but efficient. Food storage was automated, therapy logs were recorded on reels, but most had been wiped. What remained was fragmented. Sessions labeled Trial 3, memory reset, resisted, or subject shows strong maternal recall. They had tried to erase Marianne from his mind. They had tried over and over. But something in him held on. Ellis was brought to the surface, under sedation, for his own safety. Doctors confirmed physical health, but diagnosed him with dissociative amnesia and severe identity fragmentation. He didn't remember the forest. He didn't remember the day he vanished. But he remembered the signal. "The song," he said, "it plays to help us sleep," Ellis murmured to a nurse. He said, "When the notes stop, the world resets." The FBI launched a full federal investigation into the now-defunct program. Rivenhall's name resurfaced across a dozen other documents once sealed. Families of missing children were reconnected. At least 4 disappearances showed disturbing similarities, but only Ellis had returned. Hollow Oaks Watcher, the blog, vanished the day Ellis was found. All posts were deleted, the domain closed. It never appeared again. Ellis believed it had been operated from inside the facility, an automated echo designed to signal progress or completion. The 4-tone signal ceased too. For the first time in 20 years, October 2nd came and went without a whisper. Marianne brought Ellis home. Therapy was daily intense. Some days he cried at the sound of leaves and wind. Other days he asked if the man in green had ever learned how to smile. She told him the truth. No, and he never will. Ellis began drawing again, trees, birds, rivers, but every drawing had a doorway carved into the base of the trees, always closed. One day, he gave Marianne a picture and said, "This one's you. You stayed open." The story of Ellis Marden became national news. Books were written, laws changed, wilderness programs for children were restructured. But to Marianne, nothing mattered more than the quiet voice at breakfast, the one that asked softly, "Do I have to go to sleep underground again?" And she'd kneel beside him, holding his face in her hands, and whisper back, "No, baby, you're home. And it's always spring now." If this story stayed with you like it stayed with us, make sure to like and subscribe for more mysteries that challenge what we think we know. What part of Ellis's journey struck you the most? Do you believe there are still places like Tanner Ridge hiding secrets we're not meant to find? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one.